everybody. Thank you for coming to this on this really gross, rainy day. I can guarantee you that you're going to hear such amazing, interesting stories today. This is a really great group. I can also promise you that the summary of them that's on the handout is not going to do any of them justice, but I tried. But they'll be here to give you some more information about what they do, how they got there. As you know, today's topic is alternative legal careers, and that covers so many things. It covers my job. It's typically a job that a JD is not required but preferred. There are so many examples of those kinds of jobs. I will talk about that maybe a little later, but I really want to take advantage of having this awesome panel. Format today, I'm going to get some general information out before we get started, do some super brief introductions to the panel. Then I'm going to have each panelist talk for 5, maybe 10 minutes, really sort of depends on how loquacious they feel like being. They'll talk a little bit about what they do, how they got into doing what they do. Perhaps they'll talk each a little bit about how their JD fits into that whole picture, if at all. And then we'll have some time for question and answers afterwards. Just in terms of overviews, so I think I had mentioned there are handouts on the side. There are just 3 of them. There are a couple of upcoming events people should know about. On Monday at Northeastern University Law School, if anybody's interested in bankruptcy practice, all 5 U.S. bankruptcy court judges and a panel of practitioners are going to be there. I think the timing is like noon to 1:30. Lunch is going to be served, not just the brownies I do, but lunch. So you might want to take the trek in together to Boston. And also, for those of you who are 1Ls, I'm going to be meeting in your 1L program class, whether that's for the day students on Tuesdays and Wednesdays instead of Tanya and Melissa's class, and for the evening night students, it will be on Saturday at the end of your class at around 12:45. By a show of hands, how many first years? Second years? Third years? Okay, interesting. Anybody here worked in what would be considered perhaps an alternative legal career, either now or at some other time?
I did bank regulatory compliance beforehand.
All right, so you'll have a lot of, you'll see that there's a lot of, and there's another student in the audience also has done some compliance, regulatory kind of things. That's a big theme in today's panel, and I will tell you, it's just funny, last year, after the panel, I realized that everybody on the panel had a master's, and everybody on the panel worked for a government or nonprofit agency. But that was not necessarily representative of all of the people who I could have had, with the exception of Lisa, and we'll talk about that afterwards. Everybody here is an alum, and their jobs and the kinds of things you can do are very varied. So having said that, I'm going to do my brief introductions. Lisa Teresi is an attorney and a career coach. And Lisa and I were just talking about when we first met. I met Lisa in 2003 when I was a rather unhappy law firm associate in Boston. And Lisa was a panelist at a program run by the Mass Bar Association called 200 Things You Can Do with a Law Degree. And at the time, Lisa was working at Harvard, and I knew I wanted to get into higher education and specifically the law school, and that's when we met, and all these years later, I have her talking to you all about the very same topic, which is very near and dear to my heart. William, otherwise known as Bill Ryder, what a great job. He is Legislative and Regulatory Counsel at the Mass Medical Society and Executive Director for the Professional Liability Foundation. So whereas Lisa's focus is a lot of coaching and career issues, Bill is one of the people on the panel who is very focused on legislation and regulatory matters, and his focus is in the medical industry. Next to him is Rob Mellion. Rob is an 07 graduate of the law school, and he's got a great title. President, CEO, and General Counsel of the Fall River Area Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Rob does everything, so I can tell you that this is not at all representative of what he does. But he, again, does a lot of government work, a lot of public policy work, a lot of legislative work. One of the reasons that I put that he was an elite athlete and a coach in his very short bio is that my understanding is that's actually very relevant to what he's doing today, that was part of the pathways of when you became involved in the chamber in Colorado and how that became relevant to your fit for the current job that you're in now. So you never really know how these things are all going to work out, but that was why I wanted to put that in there. Marianne is basically Marianne, is that right? It's basically a mediation practice?
Yes, primarily.
What a great job. For those of you who really find that litigation is stressful and unproductive, because it is, this is a really great practice option for lawyers who want to do something like practicing law, but maybe feel like they're doing something a little bit more positive and collaborative. And I'll have Marianne talk about that a little bit more. Ted O'Neill, class of '99. Ted's got a really neat job at EMC. He is in charge of compliance and e-discovery practice. So again, he's working with or around or within regulations, corporate, whereas, Bill is doing more medical and Rob is focusing on business and industry. Ted is doing his practice in a corporate base. He works within the company. And last but not least is Mark Cohn. Mark is class of '97, and Mark is an engineer at the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. Again, constantly working for creating regulatory matters. And actually, before the panel started, it was very interesting. There was a matter that Rob was working on, that he was working on permitting issues, and it was something that he was working on with the DEP, and this all became very interrelated, and it's just fascinating, all these things that you can do and not be...
We didn't have a problem with
with everybody else. So what I'd like to do is, I'm actually going to have Lisa talk last, and because I think it would be helpful for her as someone who spends a lot of her time working with students and graduates, attorneys, trying to figure out what their next move is going to be with their legal degree. I thought it would be helpful if she spoke at the end of things and sort of summarized and also talked about her own story, because she too is a lawyer, but doesn't practice anymore. So having said that, I'm going to have Bill sort of talk a little bit about what he does and how he got started in it, how his JD affects things.
What I do is I'm what I call a subject matter lobbyist. I got into it because I worked in corrections for a long time in social services and corrections until my boss went to jail, or slightly before that. I would advise as career moves change that when you perceive that you're working for someone who's likely to go to jail, that no matter what, that you find something else to do.
You get nothing else out from today.
So I went to work for the Medical Society. A friend brought me in. I had experience working with government in terms of lobbying for social service budgets. And my friend was a lawyer and was head of government relations for the Medical Society. The Medical Society has 23,000 physician members in Massachusetts. We publish the New England Journal of Medicine. We lobby on about 200 specific bills a year in front of the legislature. There are 8,000 bills that are filed, so we go in and talk or write or present witnesses on lots and lots of legislation. We're in there all the time. My friend brought me in to this job, and one of the first things he said to me was that you are working for doctors. If you want them to respect you, you better go to law school. And he was right. And before that in corrections, I had been doing things like social services. I had been calculating people's jail eligibility, their prison sentence, whether they were eligible for certain kinds of programs. I got these things, these law books, and pull out the statute, see what somebody was sentenced in. I'd look at it. I didn't know what a green book was, the difference between the annual report, and I was making decisions on how much time people were going to be serving. There are a lot of people out there who are dabbling and making decisions about the law without knowing what they're doing, and it's not their fault because they don't know what they don't know, but I think you can learn a tremendous amount. Having said that, the thing that struck me from law school that will apply to you for anything that you do, and those of you who are first years know this, issue, rule, analysis, conclusion. That applies to anything that you do. In terms of working for somebody, if they're going to pay you for your opinion, they don't want your personal opinion. I remember somebody who in con law class with Professor Duncan, who we were talking about it, he was talking about a precedent and the decision, and the person put their hand up and said, well, I don't agree with that. And that person does not have a great career in the law. Without talking about anything else about them, but it doesn't matter whether you agree with it. That's not what people are paying you for. They're not paying you for your opinion. They're paying you for your knowledge. What is the rule? What they're paying you to identify the issue. I would also say they're paying you to identify the issue that matters. When you get to your law boards, when you get to the bar exam, then you look at that and you say, okay, I can identify 450,000 issues in this 3 pages. Which 5 matter? And in your clients, it's the same thing. They're very well trained, very smart lawyers who do not succeed in the long run because they present infinite numbers of issues. You're trained to recognize the issue. Yeah, you got to see it, but don't talk about every single one. What's the one that matters to your client? What's the issue? What's the rule? What's your analysis? And that's where your personality, your abilities, your opinions to some degree come in. And what's your conclusion? They pay you to say something other than it depends. You have to lay out the issue for them. You have to, make clear what the rule is, etc. But they're not paying you to say it depends. They're paying you.
How does that translate into your doing advocacy work? So knowing what the rule is, and then do you advocate for change? Do you advocate for it to remain the same? How does that?
Well, it depends on what's in the interest of the client. So in some cases. Legislatively. But what I'm saying is you have to understand what the rule is that you owe your client. Here's what the issue is, and maybe the client presents that to you. You come back with, here's the rule, here's what we can do about that rule, here's the conclusion, here's the recommendation. It's up to them to decide what they want to do. They can send you charging up a hill in a losing battle. That's what they pay you for. But it's up to you to let them know what the issues are. The other thing I would say briefly, what I do that's really interesting is we do amicus briefs for the Liability Foundation, and I get to go into the SJC. I get to talk to, I was looking at one this morning, we get to identify issues on appeal cases. The law trial stuff is really interesting. I don't particularly have the experience, and I doubt the talent to do it. The people who do it are really, really good. If you're going to do trial work, be good. It's embarrassing that the people who get up there in front of the courts don't deserve people who don't know what they're talking about, but they get it, even on the SJC. So I would advise you to look at the SJC website, and you can see cases and pick a couple of cases and just watch what people do and watch the arguments they get to make. You get your 15 minutes and your presentation. Sometimes you're 15 minutes, 15 seconds into it, you get a question. And you can see people saying, I don't want to talk about that. But I think that shows you have to be extremely well prepared. You have to be ready for anything in every phase. So having taken more than my time.
Oh, no. And just for those of you who might not know, SJC, Supreme Judicial Court. And the amicus briefs, which maybe you don't know, those are the friend of the court briefs. So although you're not a party to the litigation, you can actually file a brief in support or against what relief is being sought. Did I say that correctly?
And don't speak in jargon, right?
Having said that, Rob?
Sure. What do I do?
I am the CEO and President and General Counsel for the Fall River Area Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We're an organization representing over 800 businesses, member businesses in the South Coast region, and we're the voice of business for the entire region. There's also a Chamber of Commerce in New Bedford. We work in partnership with them on a lot of stuff. There are 100 chambers in the state of Massachusetts. I would say that our chamber is one of the top 10 most government affairs active chambers of commerce. Part of the job of the CEO, obviously, is I maintain the day-to-day affairs of the Chamber of Commerce. So I am, the CEO of the organization. I hire and fire. I also maintain all the committee structures of the Chamber of Commerce. We've got 41 board of directors. I'm their general counsel. And what is the issue that most often comes up? Conflict of interest. And I have to work out that. Obviously, if I have my own conflict of interest, then we would send something to a outside counsel source. But when there isn't, I'm generally the referee of the organization. I also review and draft contracts for the organization. Chambers of Commerce are involved in contracts all the time, just like any other corporation. And I do most of the drafting and negotiating on contracts that we're involved with. Case in point was we used to put on Fall River Celebrates America some time ago. There are probably about 80 contracts that were associated with Fall River Celebrates America alone, and I drafted all of them. That was fun. Glad we don't do that anymore. I say we don't do that because part of a Chamber of Commerce today is to be relevant. And what was more important for the business community, you have to say to yourself, and you notice I framed that in a question. So you see I use my legal background every day. Well, was putting on a festival for 3 days more important than actually helping our members survive? Well, the answer was no. It was more important for us to use everything that we had, all of our resources, to help members survive, to create new businesses in the area here. Part of the reason why I was hired was to do exactly that. Our chamber, it was of the opinion of the board of directors when they hired me, was off mission, was derailed, and I was hired to help put it back on mission. And that mission is to help businesses sustain themselves today, have their voice heard up at the State House. John knows me very well. And help new businesses come into the area and support them to come into the area. We get a little muddy with offices of economic development on that. And the difference between a Chamber of Commerce and an Office of Economic Development is that a Chamber of Commerce is funded through its membership. We don't get state and federal funds to operate the day-to-day functions of the Chamber of Commerce. We're a volunteer organization representing the interests of our members. So there's your difference. And economic development has a lot to do with that. So I direct the Chamber. I also direct all government affairs for the Chamber of Commerce, and this is where that ESQ comes in handy. I had a legislative background previously. I had my own law practice prior to being CEO of the Chamber of Commerce, and my practice focus area was in business representation, in municipal representation, government representation, and nonprofit representation. I think now you're starting to get why my board had a little interest in me. Prior to that, I was a developer, and I had a property out in the Jackson Hole, Wyoming area.
It's Wyoming
Yeah.
and Colorado.
It's all the same. That's what they say. That's really funny because out west, they say the same thing. When I tell them that I grew up in Rhode Island, what part of Long Island is that? So it's funny how everybody's the same about that, no matter where you are in the country. I used to own a commercial property on 4 acres with a health club and multiple entities that were on that property. And my particular part of that property is I had a high-altitude training facility and health club that catered to the Jackson Hole, Wyoming area. And I put that all together because I was previously a professional athlete with the U.S. rowing team and became a coach. Actually went overseas and was head coach to another country. Came back here and said, it would be great if there was a private high-altitude training facility in the United States. What our athletes could do if we had something like that. And I put that business plan into action and did it for almost 7 years. Was very successful at it. Ended up selling my business to one of my tenants, which was the local hospital. and was able to do what I always wanted to do, which was I got my master's degree and then I got my law degree. I
Now,
always wanted to be a lawyer.
when you owned that property, weren't you very involved in the chamber in
I was the,
Teton
yes, I
Valley?
was. I was the
Which
president.
sort of how it all sort of
So
comes
I'm the-
together at certain points.
So yeah, it's funny how your life works out for you. At that time, I was the elected version. The structure of a Chamber of Commerce is I'm the president and CEO of the Chamber of Commerce. I'm the staff leader of the Chamber of Commerce. I'm the consistency. There is also a board of directors to the Chamber of Commerce. This is how nonprofits operate in general. There's a chair of the board to the nonprofit. Here we say chair of the board. Same concept, just different titles. I was the president of the Teton Valley Chamber of Commerce out in that area, and that was the elected, that was the chair of the board for their version. And yeah, it's funny how things happen.
You did a
I
perfect
became-
job for what you do.
That background helped me get this particular job, along with my legal background and my advocacy background. Because when I was out west, I ended up getting involved with the 2002 Olympics. You see the interest there with my Highland training facility, and I was involved with the 22 Winter Olympic Games and coordinating it. Worked with, before he was Governor Romney, I worked with Mitt Romney back in Salt Lake City at the time on that particular project. So it's funny how the whole world works, and here I am today. So I also, I direct government affairs for the organization. I'm the executive director of the nonprofit organization that we have. That is our foundation for the Chamber of Commerce. I host the Voice of Business radio program because I'm the voice of the business community, so I have a radio program, a weekly show that we created 2.5 years ago. We now have a television program called The Business Connection. I'm the host of The Business Connection. And the question I guess you have is, okay, so that's great. Law degree, how does that fit in? Government affairs, general counsel, maintaining the organization. On the government affairs side, John can attest to this. I mean, part of my job is I help amend a lot of legislation up at the State House. I'm the advocate for businesses. As a result of that, I help draft, working with elected officials, legislation that then runs through the process. I've done the same thing at the federal level, working with Congressman Frank, Congressman McGovern, Senator Kerry, and Senator Brown. One of my joys was in the financial overhaul that was done. I wrote one of the amendments to the financial overhaul that passed. It's kind of nice, it's fun. And I worked with Barney Frank on that. Who was very receptive to the amendment that we put in there. On the local level, I helped draft ordinances. The recent waterfront district that was passed in the city of Fall River, I was one of the authors of that. The LED sign ordinance, I was one of the authors of that. Right now, there's legislation pending that people are seeing in the media, which Senator Rodericks, State Senator Rodericks is pushing for the Meditech situation. I didn't author it, but I am definitely lobbying for its passage. So you see where that law degree comes. Understanding the government process is very important, and my board looks to me as their expert in the government process. And I spend a lot of time up at the State House working to make Massachusetts a more friendly and hospitable place for businesses, because bottom line, it's all about job creation. So the other thing that I work on is economic development. And I'm on about 15 boards right now where I serve as a board member, and I would say that 90% of those boards are involved with statewide economic development, trying to make jobs come to the area here, or trying to retain jobs in the area here, trying to build an infrastructure, working with the state legislature in building an infrastructure in this region, working with UMass in building it. You have no idea how influential UMass has been through South Coast Development Partnership and through the individual university systems in building an infrastructure for the state of Massachusetts. And we work with them in implementing all of that. It's not a boring job. I never know what's going to happen. It's part of the reason why I really enjoy the job. I never know what's going to happen. It's definitely one of those kinds of jobs that you make the job. If I wanted to, I could just be gopher, in the sense that I could just, do business after hours, and I could just do community events. That's my choice. Some chambers do that. This chamber needed somebody who could do what I do, because bottom line is, you see the economy of the South Coast. We were a mono economy that is working and becoming a diversified economy, embracing the life sciences, technology sector, bringing them in here. One of the things that I worked on last year was the biopark, and trying to save the biopark, which we did, and helping the bioprocessing facility move forward. Big economic development projects. Working with the federal legislation, federal delegation in the 79 overchange project. You have a similar project here that has moved forward with Highway 18 in New Bedford. We're doing the same thing, trying to do the same thing in Fall River, taking that whole spaghetti ramp system, if anybody's familiar with it, putting it down to the ground, bring more of a boulevard type atmosphere there to open up our waterfront. This is what I do. It's fun stuff.
It's pretty amazing
And I
stuff.
sleep at night doing it.
Well, we've heard now from two people who do so much regulatory kind of government affairs and public policy kinds of things. So to just sort of switch things up a little bit, we're going to have Mellion talk a little bit about a different type of career you can have with your law degree.
Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate you on your choice of going to law school, of choosing to attend or choosing to attend this law school. You will not be sorry that you decided to get your law degree, or that you chose to get it here. A law degree just opens so many doors for you, and as my colleagues have said, one thing you will learn along with your subject matter is to spot the issues that matter. That will help you in every area of your life, even in just general conversations with your family and friends. You will start to notice when people talk about minutia or they talk about something, you will learn to spot the issues that matter. So that's very important. As to what I do, in a nutshell, I help people make the best of a bad situation. Mediation, people who come to mediation obviously have some sort of a conflict. The conflicts that I choose to work with are people who are divorcing, already divorced, and never married parents that have some problems that really don't need to be in court for this. They can come to mediation and talk about these problems, and we can go through the issues. There are a checklist of issues that have to be decided when people divorce. The best way, in my opinion, to do this is to sit down with a mediator and talk about these issues and explore options. I always advise my clients to have independent counsel. Now you might say, well, what's the point then of having a mediator? The independent counsel is like a coach. It's somebody in the background that you bounce things off. At the very least, at the end of the mediation, before you sign your agreement, the client should take it to independent counsel. Why? Because in divorce, at this point, some of you must know people who've been divorced, or maybe you've been divorced yourselves. Everyone has an opinion about somebody's divorce. They think they know the details. Oh, she got too much. She got the house. He pays too much. Well, first of all, they don't know the details. You don't know if someone's in the house. That doesn't mean they got the house like it's a gift. They may have traded off some other asset, or they may have bought the other party out. You don't know that. But more importantly, everyone's going to have an opinion. I suggest that people take their agreement to independent counsel, someone who does marital law, not just any lawyer, but I mean somebody who knows the subject matter, and they will give them their opinion. And then they should be able to say, if that lawyer has a question or a comment, they should be able to answer why they decided that way. If they can't, then they come back to mediation. As to how I got into mediation, my background is in education, which came in very handy with mediation, because you're sitting down with people and as part of the mediation, you do talk about the legal process. You talk about, you do not give legal advice because in mediation, even though you're a lawyer, you are not representing either party. And you make that very clear to people. I'm not representing either of you or both of you. What I'm doing is I'm facilitating their discussion and helping them make an agreement. Now, the part that comes in that is legal is in the end of all of this, I will draft for them the divorce agreement, which is sometimes called the separation agreement, but really it's your divorce agreement. That is a legal document. But in the course of the mediation, I do not represent either party, and even with the divorce agreement, I strongly suggest to them that before they sign it, they take it to independent counsel. It needs to be notarized. I don't do it, even though I am a notary, because I want them to have that. I want them to take it to independent counsel for the reasons that I mentioned, that someone should review it, someone who's in the profession, not just your neighbor, not your brother-in-law, not your sister, you know, someone who knows what they're talking about, because that's a very important agreement. The beauty of a mediated agreement is there are no surprises. It's not drafted by the one spouse's lawyer or the other, and you don't really you think you know what it says, but you really don't understand it. It was just put in front of you. People come to me post-divorce. They'll call me and they'll tell me about some term that's in their agreement. She was supposed to sell the house when my son turned 18 and it's not. I said, you need to come in with the agreement. I need to read it. And in every occasion that this has happened, the person tells me what they think it says and what they thought it said, but the words don't really say that. The comma's in a different place, a period's in it doesn't say that. And that doesn't happen with me in mediation. The clients know exactly what their agreement says and what it means.
It's my understanding that mediators do not have to be lawyers, but there is a growing trend of mediators being lawyers for the reasons that you're talking about, someone who can, commas and the periods and like statutory interpretation.
Oh,
it's
definitely.
Understanding the process.
You do not have to be a lawyer, but I would really not suggest that anybody have their divorce mediated by a non-lawyer. That's my opinion. Because as lawyers, not only because we can write the agreement, because if you are going to a non-lawyer mediator, the most they will write for you is a memorandum of understanding, which then you have to take to an attorney to turn into the divorce agreement. But not only for that reason, it's that with the issues. I mean, starting our law training, first of all, gives us an overview of the legal process of divorce. We understand it. We understand what goes on in a litigated divorce. But not only that, we just have a better understanding of what the issues are, and I've seen agreements that were written by non-lawyers, and sometimes it seems like they just go through the checklist: legal custody, legal custody, joint legal, because they don't explain what those terms mean, because a lot of times they don't know themselves. They just know those are on the list of issues. So, I mean, without painting with a broad brush, yes, I think more lawyers who previously litigated, who were represented, and maybe still do. They will represent a husband or a wife. They've added mediation to their practice, so people can choose that. Another offshoot, which I just want to touch on briefly, is collaborative law, which I intend to become a part of the collaborative law group. What that is two lawyers who agree with, well, they agree with each other, and the clients agree that they will mediate the issue, say it's a divorce, and if it devolves, neither a lawyer will litigate. They would have to get a different lawyer to litigate. So basically, it's mediation, but each person has representation. When I mediate, I solo mediate, so I have the husband and wife there. I have done mediations where one or the other has a lawyer present, but there's another model of mediation where you co-mediate, but I don't do that. But with collaborative law, the husband would have a lawyer, the wife would have a lawyer, and so it's one big mediation with your attorneys present as opposed to being coaches. That's the difference. And as I said, my background in education is very helpful with this because I can explain to people as we're going along. I give them homework in between the sessions. I like mediation because I know what I'm sparing people from. Just as an aside with statistics, divorces, in 97, 98% of the cases, they do not end in a trial. They settle before the trial. So in litigated divorces, you're spending all this time and money with all these hearings back and forth, and eventually you compromise before the trial. There's mandated four-way conferences, and there's pre-trial conferences where the judge wants to know where you are on all these issues. There's reasons for that. The judges really don't. They don't. And also, trials are cost prohibitive. Most people can't even afford to have two separate lawyers, let alone to have a trial, which is thousands and thousands of dollars. So mediation is much more cost effective, and it also saves you all the stress and anxiety that, that comes with a litigated divorce. So when we're done, I'll be happy to answer any questions about that.
So totally shifting gears, we're now going to talk with Ted about compliance and corporate sort of...
Governance, risk, and compliance is a very exciting topic.
It's a perfect job for a lawyer.
It is. So EMC, I don't know if people know who EMC is. It's the largest employer in Massachusetts currently. We have about 47,000 employees worldwide. We're an IT company, an infrastructure company. And what I do is electronic discovery and compliance for civil litigation, regulatory inquiries, IRS, SEC, DOJ, DOD, that sort of thing. How I got into this was interesting. It's based on changes to the federal rules that happened in 2007. I had Professor Clifford for civil procedure, and thank God I paid attention, because as it turns out, I actually had to know that stuff. Rule 26F was in the federal rule changes, and what it did is it flipped
You think
litigation
this stuff is
around.
nonsense, right? I mean, it's relevant. He's talking about
Totally
it. All the time.
relevant. Whoever would have thought? And what it did, it carved out electronically stored information, ESI, all the stuff we take for granted that historically really had been overlooked generally by the lawyers in the court because of the complexity, because of cost, and because, frankly, they didn't want to deal with it. So they changed the rules around. They created a whole set of rules specifically around the electronic version of this because it's got all that great metadata and all sorts of things associated with it that will help identify the facts which need clarity. So what they did is they forced all the litigants to do this really early in litigation. When I first started litigating, you could push off discovery into maybe year 2 or 3. So you could have a motion practice back and forth, no information changing hands. What you need to do, if you're in federal court, most states have adopted something similar, is come in the first 90 days and talk about your electronically stored information, who's got custody and control around it, you know, how many copies, all the things that you have to know about it to make sure you preserve it. And you can tell that I'm pretty passionate about this. A key takeaway is find something that you're passionate about. You're going to hear a common theme here of people found something that they liked, they were passionate about, and then they became subject matter experts in it. I pride myself of being one of the most knowledgeable people, if not the most knowledgeable person in the room, when it comes to electronic discovery, admissibility of electronically stored information, federal rules of procedure, federal rules of evidence, and current case law. And coming from southern New England at the time, I was looking for a way to differentiate myself from everybody else. So I found a niche in compliance and litigation that was just beginning to grow. And I have just really tried to become the go-to person that can either find the answer immediately or can help develop it, learn here, what is the issue that ultimately we're going to solve. Don't boil the ocean. Find something, identify it as a problem, then fix it. Results. We're all talking about being able to deliver results to someone. Knowledge worker, that term has come up. We're in the best part of the world to be a knowledge worker. We have bioscience, we have life science, we have IT, we have all this great education. The manufacturing jobs, some of these things that were shed, the knowledge worker is going to replace them. And what you can learn in school here can help you go find something that you're passionate about and then just go and excel at it. Become an expert at something. And I think that's the key takeaway that I have, is everybody's going to have a passion about something. And that is what drives us, what we use to get up in the morning to go do something. I'm excited to get up and go to work. And I think that would be
Do you think that a lot of people, my impression is that in corporate compliance departments, there are a great deal of lawyers for the reasons that we've been talking about, why there are a lot of lawyers who are doing lobbying and advocacy and mediation.
Absolutely. So by way of background, I come
have to
from
be a
tax and accounting. I worked at State Street for many, many years. So I come from the capital markets, mutual fund, pension fund, world transactional processing. And it's just littered with regulations. Organizations don't pick one and say, oh, we're going to comply with this one. You know, which is what we heard in Massachusetts. My God, to get everything done in this one state, you got to comply with multiple things, and it's seeing the forest through the trees. And lawyers should be, if you get out of school and you get by the bar, you should have learned how to find the tree in the forest, the issue that is clearly identified as the one that needs resolution, and then drive that. And so just finding an area and becoming an expert in exploiting your own enthusiasm around it, I think is very, very important.
Who thought corporate compliance could be so exciting? This is great. This is exactly what it's all about. It's about doing something you really love. And practicing law is not what you love. It doesn't mean that going to law school is for naught.
Because, you know, EMC is an example. We're in 100 countries. We have offices in 50 countries. We have 47,000 employees. Just think of, you know, HIPAA stuff. So personnel information, it's your health information. Everything to do with that, it's all got to be private. Each state has their own requirements around that. All your payroll, personal identifiable information, your social security number, credit card numbers, any of that, all of that, organizations have a need to manage and control that. But they're not in that business. They're in the business of doing whatever it is to generate revenue. So faster, better, cheaper, compliance to help drive the business or help drive the chamber or to help drive, you know, the medical community. That's what I think that the opportunity is. In compliance, there's a lot more ability to interpret in compliance than there is in case law. So there's a lot more gray area to get creative because the case law is what it is and you have to deal with it. But, so enjoy civil procedure. Some of you may actually use it in the future.
Or quoted on the radio.
Yeah.
So Mark, that is a tough act to follow, but I know that you're
The
pretty
passion,
passionate
yeah.
about your environmental stuff, so, you know, just try.
There's a lot of passion and emotion on this panel. When my daughter was 5 years old, she asked me, what did you do for a living, Dad? And at first, I tried to explain it to her in a way that, you know, to reduce it to her level. And I said, well, what I try to do is keep the air clean, so when you and I take a hike in the woods, we can enjoy ourselves, take deep breaths, and feel like we've really improved the atmosphere. And so with that thought, you get passionate knowing that you're using, in my case, an engineering degree and the experience of law school where it takes you through case law and what you need to do to actually promulgate a regulation. So my background is in mechanical engineering, and so my first interest was how does a boiler, turbine, engines, how do they work? And how do you make them more efficient? So starting with that kind of background in technology, there was an opportunity to work for DEP, and they needed what they call NOx controls, which is a byproduct of combustion. So I interviewed in Worcester, eventually got a job in Boston where we write regulations and policy. And immediately we were working on boiler regulations. And it's not only developing emission standards where you have to go out to a power plant, you have to see how these combustion pieces of equipment operate, what type of controls you can use to reduce different types of pollution. And then you have to figure out what is cost and technically feasible, because you can't just apply some emission standard that can't be met when the Commonwealth relies on power for the electricity in their house, heating, and cooling of facilities. So you really have to come back to the office and research what type of air pollution controls are feasible, what's cost effective, and then you go through the whole process of promulgating a regulation. So the steps in promulgating a regulation with this administration has become more and more burdensome. It's unbelievable how many reviews we need in order to just get a regulation out of our building, which to the next step, which goes to the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs. So the first step really is developing the standards, knowing how processes operate and what is reasonable. Everything's on a reasonable basis when you develop standards. And then,
Which is the standard of everything in law school, right? The reasonable man.
yeah, reasonable man, woman, person.
I'm dating myself, but I said the reasonable man.
Well, that's probably not politically correct these days, right? So in writing a regulation, you have to have an applicability section. You have to know who you're regulating. Is it major sources, minor sources that have to go through what we call a top-down, state-of-the-art back type analysis, where you're looking at the best available control technologies. So you have an applicability section, you develop the emission standards, and then you need some kind of compliance measures. So you need some form of monitoring of that process. So if you're dealing with a power plant, you'll see these huge stacks. You know, they could be 100 to 300 feet in the air, and they'll have a port where an analyzer probe is located, and there's a sample tray that goes all the way to a control panel, and it measures concentrations of all of these different kind of pollutants. So what we have to do is we actually have to go to the plant and observe the compliance monitoring activities. It could be a large industrial facility such as EMC that might have some process boilers or chemicals that are used as part of the manufacturing process, and determine what is sufficient to have a reasonable assurance of compliance, that they're in compliance with the emission standards. So you also have to have some kind of background in monitoring equipment. And then you have recording and record keeping, which makes it federally enforceable. Because we have to report at the state level, the Mass DEP, to EPA. In order for our regulations to be enforceable, they go through their review, and what they do is they'll either approve our SIP, which is a state implementation plan, which is our way of demonstrating how we will get into compliance with the NAAQS, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. Right now, we're in compliance with every pollutant except for ozone. So we're trying to figure out if, based on our ambient monitoring stations, whether we can make that classification to attainment of ozone based on results of the past 2 or 3 years, where our ambient monitors are showing that we haven't had any exceedances of ozone over the past 2 or 3 years.
Mark, I have a question there. When you're drafting these regulations, I assume your team is made up of a lot of scientists and engineers. Is there always or often or ever a lawyer in the group? I mean, obviously the groups that you're in have a lawyer, you know,
Yeah.
someone who's gone to law school, but are you responsible, are these teams responsible for actually drafting the regulations? Do you work with the legal team at DEP? How does that work?
Usually we have a team of engineers and scientists develop the regulations. And once we get to a certain point where it's about 90% where we think it's ready for going up the chain, we'll have an attorney from the OGC office assigned for a review. And then it'll go through another review, probably the top OGC
OGC,
counsel.
Office of General Counsel.
Right. And then there's probably 2 more reviews before it gets to the commissioner, DEP.
Now, do you think that the teams that you work on are different than other teams where someone doesn't have a legal background in getting to that 90% stage of the regulation, you know, the drafting part of it?
Well, I think having a legal background is paramount in order to know all the steps necessary to promulgate a regulation. The whole fact that you have to run these public hearings and actually control the public hearings. We had a public hearing once where we were regulating what we call the dirty 6 power plants, which were the plants that still were burning coal and weren't under new source review, which new source review is like the highest level of regulation. We apply what's called lowest achievable emission reductions to typically new proposals, new construction of power plants. But we recognized that we needed some authority to regulate these existing power plants that their living productive timeline was about 30 years, and they were running another 20 years. They were into their 50 to 60 years of activity by what they call maintaining and doing updates to some of the boiler systems, when in fact they were doing major modifications, which would trigger new source review. So it did take a group of us, including attorneys from OGC, just to write the applicability so that we had about 5 conditions. It would be a power plant that was built before 1979, before NSPS standards were developed, that emitted over 500 tons of NOx, over 500 tons of SO2, and 3 other caveats in order to target those 6 plants that were burning coal and were the highest emitters of mercury, dioxin, and other air toxics. So it takes a lot of creativity. It takes a lot of ability to write in legal jargon. And it also takes an engineering background in some cases in order to be able to develop these kind of emission standards. So if you have a passion for trying to do something that's going to keep the air cleaner, keep the water cleaner so it's drinkable, not contaminate sites that have a useful purpose. There's some work that we talked about with brownfields, where they take industrial facilities, they clean it up enough so that it can be used for some other purpose. And so the question is, how clean is clean, depending on what type of use you have for that property. Those are a lot of different questions that environmental engineers face. And I really like this job because you have so many different projects that you get exposed to, whether it's the printing industry and knowing what chemicals you have to regulate in that industry. They have a way of taking the trash and producing energy for the grid, as well as reducing that volume of trash. Now, they do use state-of-the-art controls to regulate mercury, again, type dioxin, heavy metals, NOx, SO2. These are all the different pollutants that incinerator plants emit. So it does take a general understanding of the processes and then applying that legal background in order to go from the technology to how do you regulate those facilities and draft a regulation that will be effective.
So I've got a question to throw out to the group. Person who gets it right gets my prize today. Echo knows how good these are because she won the prize last time. They're in mini M&Ms. Anybody have an idea? If you know, raise your hand. Of the jobs on this panel, how many of them require passing the bar, being a lawyer? Go ahead.
All,
Anybody else?
None of them?
You got it. Am I right? Does anybody have to be a lawyer, pass the bar to do what they do?
My predecessor had a master's degree in business.
Bill's wavering.
Let me think about it. Do I legally have to have a law degree to do this? On some of the stuff I do.
I think you could still give them the M&Ms? And then I'd like you to talk, can you talk about that so we can all understand that better? There's no calories because you didn't pay.
I think there,
Tell me,
the question is whether or not you can walk in the door of an agency and represent, can you be a lobbyist without being a lawyer? Yes, you can. Can you hire somebody else to represent an amicus issue in the Supreme Judicial Court? Yes, you can. Can you answer a question that comes up in the course of the process? What would this do? What is the impact of this? No, you couldn't.
that's the opinion, that's the legal, that's where you get into legal
Right.
opinion.
And one of the things I want to say is if you're practicing in Massachusetts, that whatever job you get, wherever you go, even if you're not practicing as a lawyer, whatever company you work for is going to have interactions with state regulatory agencies. That they're going to have questions, they're going to get letters. What is this? Now, if you're the person that can answer that, what is this, or I'll find out for you, you will grow in value. So I have two sons in their 20s, and I recognize what a brutal job market it is for people now, and it's very hard. What I would suggest to you is learn the law for itself, get a job, make a living, but it's not going to be, don't expect to walk into a major law firm and be in court tomorrow. But there is value in what you learn and what you know, and people will ask you questions. People will know that you're a lawyer. People will ask you questions. The work will come to you, and you will grow. No matter where you're starting, you can build on your own experience and your own ability to honestly answer questions. So do you have to be a lawyer? No, but it will help you, even if you have a job that doesn't require you to be a lawyer. If you are a lawyer, if you did pass the bar, if you do get your license and pay that, even if it's not in a related job, things will come to you, I think.
I just want to, building on what Attorney Ryder was just saying, is that Massachusetts is a unique state. Rhode Island, I think, falls in the same line. You don't need to be an attorney to run a nonprofit in Massachusetts, but a majority of nonprofits are run by attorneys.
Same thing as mediators, you don't have to be,
Right, you don't have
and
to
so,
be.
and that's common, that's what I asked Ted about compliance, and I think, and that's what I was getting at with Mark, with, his background in law, I think that, my job, okay, you don't have to be a lawyer to have my job, but it helps, because I know what you guys are going through. I've gone through all these classes, I've had a job after my first year summer, my second year summer, after graduation, so it's not a requirement, but it's preferred, and that's what it's usually said, JD preferred. For the reasons we've all been talking about, and I think that's a great segue to Lisa, because this is really what Lisa has sort of made a career in.
So I am a career coach, and my passion area is Mr. O'Neill was talking about, are attorneys who are going through different kinds of transitions and women who are re-entering the workforce after time home with children. And if I can, before I sort of get into my own story and what I do, I'm going to just say, have any of you ever wondered where the word career comes from? Because I did probably 20 years ago, and looked it up, and the Latin root means cart. And then if you look at the other Romance languages, there's some variation of the word road. And I think that that is a really great way to think of our careers, and especially as students in law school, to think about what you're learning, not only the law itself and the different areas that you can elect to take, but also the tools and skills that you're using as sort of a toolkit. So all of your legal training, and on my way, I do a lot of talking about alternative careers for lawyers and things you can do and how to switch from one practice area to another or to a quasi-legal or non-legal career. And driving down here, I'm thinking maybe we should be reframing the debate. Maybe the issue really shouldn't be alternative careers for lawyers, but than what they're doing now. So with that said, let me tell you a little bit about what it is that I do. I just finished a stint of 3 years as chair of a commission of a section at the Massachusetts Bar Association, which I helped to co-found, called Lawyers in Transitions. With your law degree, there are a plethora of different things you can do, but you're going to be hemmed in or not, depending upon how you view and look at what it is that you want to do. And especially now, given the economy, I'd urge each of you, rather than thinking of who will hire me, how can I match my resume up to what I want to do, but think about who am I? What do I want to contribute? Like based on not only my professional background, but my personal background. Where do I want to make a contribution? I mean, how do I want it to be? You might say that you're interested in children's advocacy, but there are lots of different ways you can fulfill a role in the area of children's advocacy. There's traditional practice, there's lobbying, there's advocacy, there's working in a school system. And so that's one thing. The second thing is, in terms of finding your passion, the other thing that each of these panelists talked on is the appreciation of process. So that in your toolkit as lawyers, not only perhaps depending upon what you're going into will you know the answer, you'll certainly be able to distinguish yourselves in whatever area you're going into by your ability to think in a very linear way about what the issue is because of IRAC, which you might hate it your first year, but by the time you get out of here, and by the time you actually start working in whatever industry or area you are, whether you're practicing traditionally or not, but this is particularly true if you're surrounded by other professionals who are very smart but perhaps not trained in law, you will appreciate the extent to which that sort of linear thinking and an ability to distill what's relevant from what's not and to identify where to go for the information and resources you need will distinguish you from others. And you couple that training with a passion for an area and a desire. Each of these individuals also, I'll add, they've all mentioned being very active professionally and reading and being passionate about what they do. So those are two really important things to remember. It's just a toolkit. So now with that, like, what do you want to do once you graduate from this law school? By way of background, I have been doing this in some way, shape, or form for 10 years. I started off after law school. I clerked for the New Hampshire Superior Court, and it was wonderful. It was every relationship you could possibly hope for or imagine. Our relationships with the judges were of teacher, student, professor, mentor, mentee, judge, lawyer. And then I went and I practiced for a number of years in two big Boston firms. I initially started out doing medical malpractice defense work for a large insurance defense firm. So I know everything.
They win 90% of the time.
And the takeaway from that is there's usually not medical malpractice, but there's usually a lot of bad medical outcomes that you just don't want to learn about from a fact-based perspective. And I enjoyed that a lot. What it enabled me to do was, because it was an insurance defense practice, I was taking and defending depots from the very first moment I walked in. Now, literally, a story I tell, when you begin practice, if that is the route you choose when you get out here, one of my biggest caveats would be, don't expect anyone will be there saying, okay, welcome to the firm, let me teach you how to practice. That's not how it works. Nobody has time, everybody's very busy. I walked in, the partner I was primarily assigned to was on trial down in Fall River actually for 3 weeks, and he had left me a note. Dear Lisa, welcome to the firm, here are your cases. There's literally 22 of those Redwells on it, welcome to the firm, here are your cases, I'm away for 3 weeks. If you have any questions, consult attorney A, B, or C. So I'm looking at these things thinking, all right, if there's any, I'm now, as soon as I submit the fact that I'm attorney of record, I might be committing malpractice before I learn how to practice law, right? So from the beginning of practice, I was literally thrown into the fire and represented these physicians from the very moment of answering the complaints to settling the cases. Many of them settled before trial. We had a few trials as well. That was very interesting from the perspective of getting the experience with every aspect of litigation, but it didn't avail. It didn't enable me to have exposure to more research writing-oriented aspects of litigation. So I moved over to the Boston office of a larger New York firm where the idea was that I'd be doing a lot of commercial litigation and some employment litigation as well. And now the reverse was true. I was almost never in court. I was almost never taking depots, and I was doing research and writing all the time. So that wasn't a good fit for me either. And early on, I had recognized that at some point I wanted to do something dealing with compliance issues. I enjoyed the analysis behind the law in various different ways. I wasn't someone that was interested only in labor and employment or only in insurance regulatory, but I liked that sort of bent, that proactive bent of being able to understand a particular area and get into a way to sort of play defensive tackle. And so with this, while I was at my first firm, started doing a lot of thinking and research and self-analysis with respect to what was it that I wanted to do. How did I want to take my litigation skills and apply them? And realized through a sort of series of conversations and self-reflection that higher ed was really what I wanted to do, to work in a compliance-oriented position within an institution of higher ed. And really, I was open to whatever that might be. I then, as part of that process, took on a job at Harvard University where as I was doing my informational networking, I met with an associate dean of administrative resources who himself had been a bankruptcy attorney. Because, and here's another aside, if you are interested in doing something less traditional with your law degree and you start doing networking to do it, people who are trained as attorneys will be your best allies, because those individuals will immediately assume that there are certain skills that you can bring to the position, and you will never be in the position of having to explain why it is you're looking to leave prestigious firm X. Because a lot of the times, and if you just Google lawyer dissatisfaction, you'll see that prestigious firm X usually does not lend itself to very scintillating, interesting work on the individual level. That's my experience. So,
Or much of a work-life balance.
or much of a work-life balance. I mean, there's a lot we could talk about with that.
And there's an little-known exception to the Emancipation Proclamation. Who work for large firms in their first few years.
Right, exactly. There was so many, exactly. So,
But to just touch on that, there is this, you will encounter this. I'm sure all of us have in some way, shape, or form. Practice law. You know, now you'll get that less now because in this economy, people may assume that you don't have the opportunity to practice law, that those opportunities are closed to you. But I will tell you, if people don't answer you directly, they will be thinking it. And so you have to sort of, when you're meeting people and interviewing and telling them what you want to do, you sort of have to incorporate that into your little pitch about, you know, I love compliance issues, I love the analysis, but I really want to do it more in an advocacy position, and that's why I want to work for the Children's Defense Fund, because I want to be an advocate, and that's my strongest legal skill. But you have to be willing to answer that question either directly or indirectly, because people do wonder. Then, of course, as Lisa was saying, all the people who have practiced law, like this group, and who don't anymore, will immediately understand why you don't want to practice law and will not ask you that question. They will start to commiserate with you very quickly on. But you have to understand that there's definitely the idea out there that you might want to leave as soon as you can find a law job. And if in fact that is true, I think people will actually be able to see that in you, because you won't have the passion that everybody here is talking about, you know, that true dedication. So I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No,
but I think that's really,
absolutely,
really relevant.
and that comes across. When I was at Harvard, sort of down the line from how I initially got there, I did a lot of interviewing. I was a human resources person ultimately for research centers in the humanities departments, and served on a number of different university-wide committees for which we were rewriting the policy manuals for Harvard's professional staff. And I'm telling you, when you're on the other side of the interview desk, when someone is genuinely interested in what they are looking to do, it comes across. They can't help it. And what's also interesting is when people are really excited about an opportunity, it's not uncommon for them, you hear sort of things that they've done that, and you can understand, even if they've never had that particular job as executive director of a research center before, you can see how all the roads that they've been on before are leading to this particular situation. And on the other side, you as a hiring manager will think, this is a person we should give a shot to. This person has it. This person's going to make a difference. And guess what? They do have a law background. They understand process. They appreciate process. They understand if they don't know the answer, how to go figure out the answer, how to identify who might be the subject matter expert in a perhaps more efficient way than someone who's trained in another discipline might. My first job at Harvard involved looking at over 415 mid-level jobs. This was for the associate dean of the college, of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, which is the largest school at Harvard, because each of the 11 schools at Harvard University had realized that they were beginning to be concerned as to whether or not they were complying fully with the Fair Labor Standards Act. And I was not being hired as an attorney. I was being hired under the purview of the associate dean as a sort of special human resources person to come in and interview every single one of these jobs and determine whether or not the people in the positions were there was almost nobody at the Faculty of Arts and Sciences who wanted to be told, hey, guess what? You should have been being paid overtime for the past 3 years, for a number of reasons, which I'm happy to talk to you about after the fact. But it was very interesting from an organizational and a cultural standpoint to sort of be in a position where reclassifying people, even giving them money for back pay back 3 years, was not welcome news to them. And so I managed that project. I did a number of the interviews myself. I managed about 9 people who were also conducting the interviews. We figured out a way to get people to pay that they should have been paid. Figured out a way to devise a uniform timekeeping schedule across all the departments, because until I came in, that wasn't something that was uniform, even at the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. So each of the individual departments should sort of sometimes keep track of people's time in informal ways or informal ways. But when you're talking about a federal statute, you need uniformity across all the different departments and certainly across the different schools. So when that big project was done, I became one of the human resources people for the associate dean and worked on every gamut of human resources management you can imagine. And human resources, along with compliance and some of the other things we've been talking about, is an area in which I think 15 years from now, or maybe more, we're going to see almost completely staffed with attorneys, because there are just so many different labor and employment alone, whether you're talking about labor and employment or compensation or pension issues, every area of human resources management, perhaps with the exception of the counseling that one does, although even the career coaching and counseling that HR people do, there are still, obviously laws around how that can go. All of these different subject matter areas that a good human resource person needs to know touches on the law. So there are many, many, many areas where, as we become sort of an increasingly specialized and regulated country, whether there's Sarbanes-Oxley or the new Fair Labor Standards Act, the ability to distill what the relevant law is and how it's needed will be very applicable. While I was at Harvard, I started to work on career transitions for lawyers, and as part of my HR work at Harvard was also counseling Harvard's professional and administrative staff on their own employment issues as part of what a human resource person does. A human resource person in a large institution, and perhaps this is true at EMC too, will look at what if we've got a good employee who wants to make a switch, the human resources people will work with those individuals to put them elsewhere. So that's sort of the quick overview of the different things that I've done. I've been very involved with work-life issues with MIT Sloan School and then the MBA, but the take-home I really hope that you're getting from this is that with a law degree and the training that you're getting, you're only constrained by what you aren't imagining you might want to do. So think really clearly about what are you passionate about? What are you interested in? And not just on an intellectual level, but listen to your gut. And that's something that can be hard to do. And when I primarily work with individuals who are let go from large law firms. Those are the majority of my clients. And a lot of them have been practicing for so many years. They don't know anymore what their gut is telling them they really want to do. So I work with these people who have been practicing in the best law firms for 5, 10, sometimes 12 years, and they're very good at this one particular area, but they're saying, but I don't like it, and I don't want to do it, and I have no idea what I want to do. So it's really important to listen to and to take the time to assess and reflect on what it is that you're passionate about. That will make all the difference.
Well, one of the things, I think that Lisa and Ted and everybody else also just really done a good job of summarizing the themes of what you're hearing across the board. So I'm not going to reiterate that. But one of the things that I always find interesting every year when I do this panel is the list of skills that people talk about, things that they've done. Because one of the things, and Lisa was talking about this at the end, when there's a great employee who wants to make a transition and HR tries to figure out where else to put them, as you said, you're assessing their skills. And where else can that skill set be used that adds value to the company? The kind of skills that I heard people talk about today: advocacy, analysis, conflict resolution, contract interpretation, statutory interpretation, counseling, legislative background, negotiating, preparation, problem solving, providing opinions, regulatory knowledge, and writing. So instead of just thinking about being a lawyer and practicing law, you can think about those skills that each of you are developing and figure out what it is that you might want to do with them if it's not, in fact, practicing law. I did promise some time for question and answer and for people to come up and talk to the panelists individually. I don't know if any of the panelists have some sort of takeaway that they want to elaborate on that they haven't had a chance to yet, because I really think that each of your jobs are, although there are lots of common themes, are very different, and I really just think that everybody can really get so much from all of your insights.
I just want to make one comment about, I'm on the business law section for the Mass Bar Association. Just so you know, over half the attorneys on the business law section are involved in in-house counsel. So they're not practicing traditional law as litigators. They're general counsel to Cumberland Farms or to GTAC, or in my case, to a Chamber of Commerce.
There's a real variety of things we can do. Well, I don't know if anybody has questions that they want to ask the panel, or if not, then you'll have, people can come up and talk individually. All right, so you do have a question?
Yeah, this is actually towards Attorney Ryder or Attorney Mellion. What advice could you give like a first-year law student that is interested in getting into the lobbying field, or where to start, what contacts to make, things along that line?
Massachusetts is a very complex lobbying environment, to say the least. And to simplify it, there's two different kinds of lobbyists. There's subject matter lobbyists, and there are relationship lobbyists. And there are people who kind of bridge between the two. There are people who, if you weren't born into it and you weren't raised in it, you're not going to be a really good relationship lobbyist. It's a very tough thing to start if you weren't out holding a campaign sign when you were 6. Massachusetts is very tough to be simply that relationship lobbyist. I think what you can do is you can get some exposure to campaigns in your local area. You can volunteer on campaigns early in the stage to get a look at what do people do. And many things in the law and many things in being a state rep or anything like that, there's getting the job and doing the job. See how people get the job. So get involved in those campaigns. But the thing that you can really do is get some kind of a position where you can advise somebody. If you want to do this, this is the language that will get you exactly what you want. Being able to write, being able to understand where in the law this goes. And a lot of that comes from reading about it, thinking about it, talking to people, understanding the statutes, understanding, you know, how the regs fit in. It's a job area that's not going to go away. It's a very tight knit. It's a small group of people. It's not easy to break in on it, but I think it's something that you really want to be a subject matter lobbyist. Much less likely to get arrested if you're a subject matter lobbyist.
May I add?
Please.
Mike, I have a question for you.
Sure.
What is your background right now in lobbying or government action in general?
So I live in Virginia, just outside of DC. I've had internships on the Hill, but my work background is all in federal banking compliance.
Okay.
So nothing like legislative.
Then here, I needed to know your background because the answer is specific to your background. What year are you? You were a second year?
First year.
First year. Oh, perfect. A mistake that I saw law students make when I was here in the law school was not clerking or interning or getting a job in the legal profession and focusing just on passing the bar. You're in school to pass the bar, but in your limited free time, it's your job to get a job. And if you have an
to say this.
and if you're not taking steps right now to have employment during the summertime or while you're in school, when I was in law school, I was working for a law firm, which I got that position from an externship that I took with the city of New Bedford. I met an attorney there who liked the work I was doing at the New Bedford law office, and he brought me into his law office. I learned a tremendous amount from that person. And that individual is very politically connected. But the point that I'm making is if you have an interest in government affairs, then you need to get yourself, and there are so many internships available in government affairs. You need to start building an employment record in government affairs so that when you graduate, you're not starting. You're already on the ground running. That's my best advice to you.
I have two other pieces of advice. One is
Ideal.com or .org.
make sure you talk to John Quinn, who is in the back of this audience. He is our resident public interest specialist and not too long ago state rep for this area. He's dealt with a lot of lobbyists in his time. I'm sure he can give you some interesting insights. The other thing also is, you can think about, well, use your banking regulation background to your advantage. And there are definitely lots of professional groups that, we just went through this. There's all sorts of changes in banking regs, and they need advocates and lobbyists. And so
Right.
you can definitely take what your prior experience is and package that with your law degree and your other kind of interests and make it, partner them together, make a marriage. And then
Unless you hated it. If you-
Not a good idea.
Be careful of what you get good at.
But my first thought when listening to you was there's an organization in Massachusetts called AIM, which is the Associated Industries of Massachusetts. And their job is to represent the interests of industry. Well, your background is one of their interests.
Yes,
Let me just
John.
add one thing quickly. We're actually going to start a legislative research and drafting program here. Maybe Bill and Rob could maybe get involved in. Our librarian used to be the State House librarian, or assistant, and he and I are starting a program which we're working with the administration to ramp it up, work with legislators and entities to draft legislation and actually get into that whole business. So you'd be the perfect first recruit that we have.
So for those of you who don't know, that's John Quinn. He is the Director of Graduate Public Service at the university and does, I'm going to say, at least half of his work here at the law school. We're trying to make it even more. And if any of you are public interest fellows, you know John personally because he sort of oversees all of
Leslie,
your
just real
progress.
quickly, one of the best classes I ever took at the law school here was taught by Spencer, and that was statutory interpretation. I use it every day. I think
And I
of that
bet you
class.
everybody on this panel, on some way, shape, or form, is dealing with statutes and regulatory matters on a almost daily basis to a certain degree. Maybe not Lisa anymore, but during your time at Harvard certainly was, and that was not
Every day.
being employed as a lawyer.
Everything.
Well, I promised that we'd end at 1:30. I can't thank, this panel was just, I could talk to you guys for hours. It's just so fascinating. Thank you for your time, and I know I promised we'd be over by 1:30, but maybe you can stay a little longer.